Hello, 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 listeners, and welcome back to another episode of the Cult Vault podcast. I'm your host, Kacey, and today we are revisiting the troubled teen industry, which is a subject that I haven't been covering for a while, but it's always something I like to keep my eyes on, and it's something very important to me and the work that I do. So I'm very happy to introduce you all to Kari. Hi, Kari.
Thank you for saying my name correctly.
How are you today?
I'm good. I'm good.
Good.
It's a struggle, but I'm good. I'm good.
Yeah, it's a wild time over in America right now, and we've just had a brief conversation about the difficulties over there currently, and I have been trying to reach out to all of my loved ones over there, and I hope everybody is managing to somehow stay safe and sane. But without going into the political landscape of the United States of America, can you introduce yourself to the listeners, please, Kari?
Hi, my name is Kari Bunn. I went to a reform school from 1994 to 1996 called CEDU, which stood for Charles E. Diedrich University, and he was the man who started the cult of Synanon. I was a part of a documentary that came out on YouTube called Surviving CEDU. Once I'd seen it on YouTube, these little clips that Liam Scheff had put out, I contacted him and was interviewed, and my interview never came out. I know that he also interviewed many other people from CEDU because when I started doing real interviews with the film crew, they were telling me about it. So this is kind of a continuation of work that Liam did over 15 years ago. And then 2 years ago, I was on a podcast called Straight Outta BS, and it's my friend Jordan who's done over 150, close to 200 interviews of survivors just telling their story. They sit with him and they have as much time as they want, an hour to 4 hours sometimes, where they can just tell their story. And it lets it so that people can go and, visit the people that they love, like people have watched my stories over the last couple of years and they, get to know me better. So I feel like it's a very healthy way for the story to be told because, you just go there for this. But I realized that because some of the schools that are kind of the model for the whole troubled teen industry to exist in the first place, like my school, because we were so different from the schools like Academy at Ivy Ridge or Castle by the Sea or a Spring Creek Lodge, like all these WASP schools, that we had to help them stop it. Because I believe, because after I was on Jordan's podcast, I asked my friends, hey, can you please go on Jordan's podcast? Like, I think that CEDU's almost one of the reasons this thing still happens because we're not talking out about it. Because people kind of know that, like, CEDU was the best one. Like, we never got beat. We ate well. It wasn't, if I had to choose again, if I knew I had to go somewhere, I would still choose CEDU because it was the least abusive out of all the places. But it also was the most culty, except for, I think, Cascade and Hyde. So so I've been making a documentary, so when I realized that people wouldn't go on Jordan's podcast, I was like, well, I know that we have to fix this issue, and I knew that this was a relevant subject. You know what I mean? Like, I knew that this was a fascinating subject. I knew that this was a story that I've been wanting to tell my whole life and have never been able to. I've always just told people, oh, I'm weird because I went to a culty reform school of famous people's kids in the 90s. So it's been something I've always wanted to explain. And I found that other survivors of this are vastly embarrassed. This is not something they've ever told anybody in their life. And so I was like, well, I don't mind talking about this. Like, and there's a lot of people that are behind me that I knew there or that have come to love me because they know that I'm doing this for good reasons, that support me because they don't feel comfortable enough to be talking about this like the way that I'm able to.
Talk about Charles E. Diedrich and him kind of almost being he's like the grandfather of the CEDU schools, because we talk about CEDU as though it's one school, but it did have like its cousins almost,
Right.
So if you have
So the
Charles
first
E. Diedrich as
cousin,
the grandfather.
yeah, so the CEDU was started by Mel Wasserman and Bill Lane. And I wanted to say that name because a lot of people don't know Bill Lane is involved in all of this. Bill Lane I don't necessarily know for sure. I don't know if there's any proof that Mel Wasserman was in Synanon. He might have been a lifestyle that was just kind of like on the outside of it. But Bill Lane definitely was in Synanon. And he is only known as the guy who had the escort services for all the troubled teen schools. He was the man who had the company that would wake children up in the middle of the night and say, you can come with us the easy way or the hard way with handcuffs. That's Bill Lane. When I was at CEDU, we knew Bill Lane as the escort service. When I opened the box from 1997 and found Bill Lane as the owner of CEDU, over all of the CEDU schools, I was like, are you kidding me? And I know that even today, Bill Lane died a few years ago, but I know that his daughter still runs schools in his name. Still like runs an escort service in his name, and nobody really even fucking knows about it.
Wow, that's wild, because earlier conversations I've had would talk about Mel Wasserman kind of like being the overseer of the CEDU schools and kind of saying, we think Bill Lane's involved, but we don't know if his name's on any of the paperwork.
It's
So
on
I
all
would,
of the paperwork. It's on all the paper for RMA, for CEDU, for Boulder Creek Academy. Bill Lane was a much bigger part of CEDU than even Bill Valentine. Yes, I know that you know who Bill Valentine is. Bill Valentine I don't think really owned anything. Bill Lane was Bill Valentine's boss.
so if Charles E. Diedrich is the grandfather of the CEDU schools, can you give the listeners who might not be aware a quick overview of what Synanon is, how that led to CEDU, and how CEDU and the cousins of CEDU are part of the troubled teen industry, but kind of in their own slice of the TTI?
Got it. Yeah. So Synanon were, if you've ever heard the term, today is the first day of the rest of your life. That I think a lot of people think that came from AA, but it didn't. It came from Synanon. Synanon, right when it started, was kind of good. It was for back then. If you were on heroin, you were considered thrown away, like you were garbage. You were unsalvageable. So Synanon was the thing for if you were on heroin, you would go to this house and other ex-heroin addicts would sit on a couch with you while you got sober. So it was like, the first kind of, intervention kind of thing, but like it was helpful. So, but then what happened is that MK Ultra got involved somehow, but there was a certain time where he figured out that he didn't need LSD or hallucinogenic drugs to have transformative experiences. And that's where the game came out of, and like the trip. He would do certain things to basically break people down and then build them back up again. So people left. I interviewed somebody that had the choice to go to Synanon or CEDU. And they had chosen CEDU because it was by that time known that Synanon was maybe a cult. So yeah, there was a bunch of schools that kind of were derivative of Synanon. I know like the Seed is one of them. CEDU is my school, and Hyde and the Elan School are also Synanon derivative. So my school started in 1967. It had, I'm guessing at least 3 to 4 people directly that worked for Synanon. In the early 70s, we started to pick up the tactics of Est and Primal Scream and stuff like that. And earlier on, they would read The Prophet by Khalil Gibran almost like it was the Bible. And the prophets in in the early 70s, they didn't have names or themes the way that they did later on in the 80s and much more in the 90s. So, Mel Wasserman slowly would pick up little, self-help things from weird movements over time. So it kind of became a mishmash of all this stuff that he kind of made his own self-help religion. And so in that, I don't know which came first, Cascade or RMA, but at some point in the 80s, put sugar in the gas tanks of other staff at CEDU, took a bunch of kids and moved them to a different school called Cascade. It's kind of this legendary story. Like we would hear about like rogue staff left CEDU and started their own school. Like they were not a sister school, but somewhat related, because sometimes we would get people from Cascade coming to CEDU. But the first real sister school was Rocky Mountain Academy in Bonners Ferry, Idaho. And they also had in Idaho Ascent, which was our wilderness camp. Like if we didn't fall in line at CEDU, they were like, if you're not good, you're going to get sent to Ascent. So it was like a deterrent. But a lot of people have told me that Ascent was not bad, that like they would have rather stayed at Ascent the entire time, because a lot of the people at Ascent knew, they would say like, oh, this isn't CEDU. Like they kind of knew that CEDU was culty and they were different. But yeah, and then so Rocky Mountain Academy was a much more brutal school. It was advertised to be the same, but it really wasn't. From what when I've actually interviewed people that were there, I found that the people that graduated CEDU and the people that didn't graduate CEDU, the people that graduated CEDU are happier as adults. The people that didn't graduate CEDU, I feel like, are much more damaged. It's not a diss, it's just an observation. And I feel like that's the opposite for Rocky Mountain Academy. I think if you graduated Rocky Mountain Academy, you are more damaged than if you got out early. And I think it has something to do with the programming. They did have a certain science to the formula of what they did to us at CEDU, and they fucked it up when it got to other places. And I know that sounds crazy because we're talking about cults, but you know, what this comes down to is that when I was looking into like all of the sects of the troubled teen industry, like the different, you know, ways they run, like the fundamental Baptists and the Mormon ones and the non-secular, like I thought CEDU was non-secular, and we are not. We are Scientology. When I started to really look into Scientology, and then I found out that Landmark and Est really comes from Scientology too, that all of the breaking down ways that they would like make us attack each other, or like do all the guided stuff or whatever, the mental manipulation, that's Scientology 101. That's like basic bare bones Scientology. And I don't think that anyone's really even thought about why when we watch Scientology documentaries, it feels so fucking familiar. It's not because it's just also a cult. It's derivative. We're a derivative of that same cult of Scientology.
When you mention Est and Landmark, for anybody that's listening that might not know what those two things mean, we're talking about large group awareness training. So you've recently read a book by an author who left Landmark.
I know somebody that has researched, again, I've spoken with him many times before, and they have a theory that LGATs are dangerous because what they do is they force a hypomanic state on people, and they do it so many times that afterwards they are, you know, of course being bipolar is not, you can't make a completely sane person be bipolar, maybe not, but if there are those tendencies, you know, in your family line, you know, if it runs in your family, and if you go through Landmark and you're into it, it's a very high probability you afterwards will become bipolar. And when I spoke to him and I told him that I was bipolar, and when I was talking about my documentary, he was fascinated by that. And even when I've told other people that about his theory, because I kind of had the same theory. I have a poll on Facebook for survivors to, like, you know, ask like questions, and like I would think that even like 50 to 60% of the survivors are autistic or on the autistic spectrum. And I would say 90 to 95% of us either have ADD, ADHD, or bipolar. And I think that like our experiences in these institutions or cults force those things to become very, you know, much more extreme than maybe if we weren't tortured psychologically as teenagers. Maybe we wouldn't have ended up like this.
It gives us a brief kind of overview of Synanon into CEDU, and CEDU being made up of like an amalgamation of large group awareness training influences like Est and Landmark, and also kind of like throwing in the core principles of Synanon, and also any other little bits that Mel Wasserman picked up along the way.
Yeah, and that's why it's so hard, because it's not just one thing, right? Because it's like we would hear about like what we thought we came from, and that's been my whole bag, is that when I saw the program and I saw the towel that was wrapped in duct tape in the second episode, I recognized that. I think that comes from the I Want to Live prophet, the pounding of the pillows, and also comes from the I and me's, the Friday night of the fights. I think that they combined or bastardized to, rituals that we had to do. Because the thing was, is that my whole idea is I'm pretty sure, like when I spoke to Jordan, I heard about the experiences that the kids at Spring Creek Lodge had to go through, this, like the seminars, right? When we would talk about specific things, they were the same thing. In my sizzle reel for my documentary, it's just two little interviews. And the second one is a man named Rocky, and he went to Castle by the Sea and Academy at Ivy Ridge. He was asked to be in the program, but he wasn't ready for it. So I made friends with him, and I got him to talk to me, and just because I had been very kind to him and made friends with him. And I'd asked him about the seminars, and he was like, oh, well, there was this one where we had to stay, you live and you die. And I said, Rocky, are you talking about the lifeboat? And he's like, oh, you know about the lifeboat. And you can see him switching his eyes to looking away from me, because my friend Nick, who I went to CEDU with, was like across the room and back, like making audible gasps because Rocky was saying CEDU words. And so he was like, so it's like this is all connected, and it's all connected by the fucked up psychology that they made us go through in the name of therapy. And I knew that when we went through it, it was fucked up. By the time it got to WASP, it was just torture. There was no love in it. There was nothing helpful. And it was still a cult, but it was more like Guantanamo Bay. Like we had summer camp compared to a lot of the WASP schools, but it is still the same thing.
Okay. So when we were talking earlier about CEDU and its cousins, and that being kind of one slice of the TTI,
So
you've
all of
mentioned.
the other schools are Cascade, which was not a sister school, but a spin-off school. And that was I think that's in California, like somewhere in Northern California, I believe. I don't remember exactly. But then there's Rocky Mountain Academy in Idaho, and then Ascent. There was Northwest Academy that was also, I think, in Idaho. And there was a riot there right after I graduated in 1996, and I think it closed for a little while. There was also Boulder Creek Academy and Mount Bachelor Academy. And those schools were very different. I made friends with a woman named Elizabeth Anderman who was in Teen Torture Inc. She's in the third episode, and she spoke about Mount Bachelor Academy. And Teen Torture Inc. messed up so badly that if I hadn't known her, I would not have ever known that she went to a CEDU school. It made it look like it was a whole other sect of schools, even though she was talking about Mount Bachelor Academy. If I didn't know her, I would never have known that HBO talked about a CEDU school. And so the reason why I'm very open about, the documentary is to catch the people that are all finding that this is a subject that's being, discussed, that this is something that's trying to be talked about, and that, like, you have no idea how many people are just like, have not thought about this for 30 years, and they turn on Netflix or they turn on HBO or and they're like, who's making money off of this? First of all, like, this is my secret pain. Who is making money off of this? Why wasn't this done better? Why, you know what I mean? There's a lot of criticism because this is scary for us. This is also like ruining people's lives that had nothing to do with it. Like, I'll see posts on Facebook where my friend Ryan was like, I just got out of prison. I found out that you guys all made some fucking documentary called The Program, and now I'm not allowed to Thanksgiving or Christmas. What the fuck is going up with these documentaries? And I was like, hey, dude, be in mind, because that is a rightful fucking argument. You know what I mean? Because, this is, we have to do something different in the way that Michael Moore made documentaries, where he changed people's minds about something by making something that was so important it became part of pop culture. That's what I'm trying to do, and I know I can't do that on my own. So I've been trying to be very public to find the creative people who have been through these experiences that want to make something great, because it cannot be a handful of bad experiences. It can't be a whole bunch of sad stories. Nobody wants to watch that. It's not consumable, and it doesn't make people feel better. And I know that might sound bad, but we have to make something that, empowers people to know that they can bring on change, and not just make it seem like a helpless thing that nobody can do anything about, or that it's not in their backyard. It's a very complicated issue too, because a big secret is a friend of mine started working at a troubled teen school in close to me. And I immediately was like, oh my God, you're going to help me get from the inside, right? And then I found out it's non-abusive. There's no culty shit going on in there. There's no like, thought reform. The kids are allowed to call home twice a day unsupervised for 15 minutes. And that's just in the beginning. They're allowed to go home like a couple times, like for at least a month or two over the like year, a little over a year that they're there. It's very different. But my friends think that this school is just like the ones where we know kids are getting horrendously abused. And it's like we have to be adult enough to actually pick apart what's happening in these places and not get so triggered that we can't actually look at what's happening in these places because it's not all the same. Some of them are helpful. These places exist for a reason, but we have to pick apart the ones that have culty practices in them because that's something we can stop.
Yeah, that's tough. That's tough. It's like, it reminds me of being asked the question, like, are there any good cults? No, is the answer to that question. By definition of the term cult, so you can have benign cults and destructive cults, depending on the severity of abuse and control happening within those groups. But even a benign cult will have a level of control that means that individuals within that environment do not have autonomy over themselves. And I think it's now at the point with the troubled teen industry where if there are schools that are acting in a capacity that is non-abusive, that is true to its mission statement, that is, practicing legally as a reform placement, it can't really be considered part of the troubled teen industry because the TTI label is now associated with abusive schools that institutionally abuse children. That's how I would take it anyway. And I mean, the program as a documentary was quite successful over here in England.
Dude, it wasn't really. People are watching it over there.
Yeah, it was like number one or in the top 10 for a couple of months, and I was having a lot of conversations with people who were saying, I can't believe this happens. It was almost like an introductory documentary to the troubled teen industry. So it might be great to have that, as an introductory complementary piece to your deeper dive documentary. And I think
absolutely. What I'm doing is
all of the media to come together. People are like, oh, there's so many cult podcasts, how do you make yours work? And I say, even if 10 hosts of cult podcasts covered the same cult, every episode would still be different.
These things are so complex. They are so complex. I always knew that like I'd meet people and they'd be like, when are you going to write a book about your life? And I'm like, I couldn't because it would need an encyclopedia first to explain CEDU. That the story of what we went through, like you had Mike Balaban on for hours talking about this shit and he could have told you a lot more and he wasn't even there past, I think, a year or something. I think he was only there about a year, maybe like a little over a year and a couple months. And I remember like that stump that he had to go, he had to dig this fucking stump. And it was like he was on it for months. And it was like, I remember like, when he was talking, it was like, there was even a time that like he got out and he went to like a psych hospital for a little while, like on vacation from CEDU. And he came back and he wrote a song with my other friend Cody. And they like sat around all the house and sang the song that he wrote about being in the hospital. I remember that entire song. Like I remember all the words to it. Do you know what I mean? Like it was very cool for me to like, hear my friend talking about, something like this that was so secret and so, so shameful. And he was brilliant. He was brilliant. Mike Balaban, please, I'm trying to find you for a very long time.
I'll email him and I'll ask him if he's happy.
No, and we keep missing each other, and because he's not on Facebook, and like, so he was on your podcast, and then I was on Jordan's podcast, and then he was on Jordan's podcast. So like, we keep kind of missing each other, and the thing is that this stuff is so hard to think about, and because we have trauma with each other where we were forced to do really embarrassing shit, A lot of us are very scared to talk to each other because we don't know what those other people remember, or we don't know what those people really thought of us, or we were forced to be so insecure about stuff, we still hold that and think that that's how we are still seen by those people. But Mike, like, he was brilliant. Like, I could, like, when he was talking to you, like, I could tell that, like, he had prepared himself for a very long time. It is very true what you said about, people talking to you and, like, they'll take their interviews back, or they'll say, like, delete this when they're not ready. Because that happened to me, and I feel really bad about it because I interviewed for 3 days in California, and I met a survivor who had been at CEDU in the mid 80s. And she had just seen the program and she wanted to help because she was like, and she was just figuring this shit out. As kind of we were talking, we spent an entire day interviewing her. And, she said brilliant stuff. And then when I was like, can I use this for the sizzle reel? She's like, no, maybe if this comes out and it's like, the Synanon fix or HBO, yeah, but, and I was like, so I just wasted a third of my time. You know what I mean? Like, no, if you're not uncomfortable with it right now, you're not, I can't be editing and think that I'm going to use your footage and you're going to take it out later. Because, this is not a normal film production because of how sensitive this subject is. I have not made my own release forms for people to sign it because I don't feel comfortable asking people to sign. Can I have artistic fucking control or, over everything you say to make a movie? Like, that makes me very
Yeah.
uncomfortable. Like, the people have
It's
told me
hard.
that you can use it, but I'm still going to wait until, like, I really want to wait until everything's done and then be like, can we still release this?
It's
Because
hard. Yeah,
it's
you need
so
to.
sensitive.
It's either you risk having your time and some really amazing material, wasted, or you go through the difficult process of asking people to sign things. And if you don't, you might find yourself in a tricky spot later on where you're trying to release things and people then retract their permission. So you've got to find
Oh,
line
I know.
there.
I know that
It's
I'm messing this
hard.
up. I'm very aware that I'm screwing up left, right, and center. And it's made people like on my team leave and call me up, being like, Kari doesn't know how to deal with people. Kari needs to go to therapy so she can continue this documentary. And I was like, I'm like, I'm just another broken person. I do have my friend is a director. Is the director. He has worked in film for over 20 years because he was on a reality show and he's a musician. So he just kind of fell into working in film. So when I, knew I wanted to make this documentary and I was flying out to LA, I was like, hey, can you help me? I didn't realize he was going to show up with $100K worth of equipment and do 12 people's professional job for 3 days. Like, he brought an A game, like A-level game I was not prepared for. So I still have to keep rising to the level of professionalism. And I'm a rookie. I've never done this before. I don't plan on doing this afterwards. So, but it's only because this is such a relevant issue. Just this year, that there's been Hell Camp, there's been Teen Torture Inc., there's been the Synanon fix, the program. There's like all these ones that just come out in the last year,
Yeah.
So, I mean, this, like a friend of mine that went to Cascade, she like met up with somebody who was a staff that she knew at Cascade, and she was brought in a room full of people that still work in troubled teen schools today who had just seen the program and they were like, talk to us about your trauma. We want to be part of the solution. Like, these were people that run schools right now because, like, everyone doesn't talk to each other, and the abuses that happen in a lot of these schools are not known by people that really have good intentions to help children. But we have to be strong enough to pick apart and say, these schools are non-abusive, these schools are very abusive, because it's not just black and white. Like, these places exist for a reason. But what we do have to stop is the whole idea of tough love, and that if your kid smokes pot one time or is addicted to video games, there is no need to send them away to a reform school where their brain is going to develop on its own while it's wondering where the fuck their parents are. It's never helpful. If there's any help that needs to be had for a teenager, it should be in the home with therapy and professionals. It should never be done, where you don't know what's happening to your children, because that's when bad stuff happens.
Right, right. Or in a non-abusive school, that it is following its own constitution and guidelines that have been vetted, and there are third party organizations that have come in to certify the school as compliant with
Most of those,
like
I would guess that most of
regulations
those
and
were also
legislation.
bullshit, though. Like, I would say that, like, any, like, organization that says that, like, they are the ones that accredit, like, the schools, I don't trust that. But, like, if a parent is wondering, like, oh, how do I tell the difference? If you can talk to your children multiple times a day and it's not, supervised, that's okay. It's all about what these places do is make it so that it's like, there's this seclusion of, like, or like they monitor phone calls, they monitor conversations, they don't want you to talk about certain things, and they lie to your parents. It's that manipulation. If there's no element of that, then you're probably okay. But if they're telling you that you can't talk to your own children, you don't know what they're going through, so that you can't be there for them afterwards, that's, a big red flag. It's a huge red flag. You should always be knowing what's going on with your kids if they're going through treatment.
So, kind of talking about CEDU as and the cousin schools of CEDU being kind of one slice. You also mentioned WASP. That's kind of like the more Mormon based, Utah based, very similar to CEDU, but also completely different, which is something we talked about before we hit the record button. That these schools are all the same, but also completely different, which is a really hard concept to try and describe to people that aren't familiar with the troubled teen industry. But you also mentioned Liam Scheff, and I think it's important for people listening that aren't aware of the CEDU schools or who Liam Scheff was to kind of just give an overview of Liam and his work before we go into your experiences at CEDU.
So Liam was there, I believe, in like 1991. He graduated, I believe, but from the people that I believe he was there very early 90s, maybe a couple years before I was there. He almost 20 years ago just started filming his friends and other people, and talking about the really the CEDU curriculum, like, the really bare bones of why it was so weird. Like, he explained some of the prophets, I think. I think he explained, raps was what Mel Wasserman. Dennis Dockstetter was brilliant in it. He was the one staff that was in Surviving CEDU. Dennis was the reason why we never were beat at CEDU, I believe. I believe that because Dennis he had a band camp, a music camp on the mountain. And because he was kind of like, grandfathered in to the CEDU curriculum because, it was like on his mountain, he was there, I believe, to make sure it didn't get too crazy. I think that, like, I have never met one person that has said that Dennis Dockstetter was ever mean or hurtful once. So, I believe that the man that was the staff in Surviving CEDU was the reason why our school was non-abusive. But yeah, Liam talked to a bunch of people, and it was very powerful. It was the first time that anybody had really talked about CEDU online. And I contacted, after it came out, I contacted him because I was like, I have a very interesting story about CEDU because of two specific reasons. The first is because when I got to CEDU, after a month, my mother died, and I had to attend her funeral. I had to go to the hospital, come back, and then go back for her funeral, and I had to pretend that my entire family and friends did not exist. I couldn't look at them, talk to them, touch them. They couldn't do the same thing to me. And so that was very, just kind of ridiculous. But because I had something to cry about at CEDU, I got over it. It's not something that I cry about. Oh, it's because CEDU was, that made you cry about stuff all the time. I had something to cry about. That was real. So that stuff is out of me. I'm okay with the fact that my mother died as a CEDU. It's not painful for me anymore. It's just a fact. But the other thing is that I'm a pilot's daughter, and I'm from Connecticut. CEDU was in California. So I used to fly for free. So I used to go back to visit CEDU all the time. And one time I went back for a week, and as Dennis was driving me up the mountain, he says, there's this new girl, her name is Paris, and she's refusing to do anything. She won't talk to anybody. If she likes you, will you be her big sister for the week that you're here? And I was like, yeah. So I was Paris Hilton's big sister for a fucking week. When I was 17, she was 16. And so when she was when she got famous and was acting a fool, dancing on tables, whatever, I was like, I kind of know why she's doing that. She's rebelling from what she went through, at these places. And when she started being like our advocate, and then I met Jordan, and I was like, well, I could make a documentary. There's no way she doesn't remember me. She wouldn't talk to anybody. She'd only been there a couple of weeks. And then when I came there, I looked like her at that age. We were both skinny blonde girls, and I had makeup on. I just found out, when she got to CEDU, she dug a hole to hide her fucking expensive makeup somewhere in the woods. But, so like when I got there, because they were like, if Paris Hilton likes you, will you be her big sister and try to tell her that CEDU's not that bad because she keeps on fucking up and they're going to send her to Provo. And she doesn't, and like we knew about the other schools. Like we knew that if we got sent somewhere else, that was worse. So you better go in line or you're going to be, you're going to get sent to a worse place. So all I did was like, tell her my story, like have her tell me her story and like kind of be like, girl, this place isn't that bad. There's worse places you can go. If you just, let it happen, you'll get out in a little time. Your parents aren't going to pull you out, And I have always felt very guilty for that. Like I have felt like, like does she remember me as like, maybe like half staff or, you know what I mean? Does she remember me as, a bad person or a good person? But, so that was part of the thing. It was like, she would remember me. If we talked, she would remember me because I was there with her for a week. And when I realized, in June, when I'd shown up to DC to be a part of her SICA bill because she put out word that, she wanted her survivor family to show up to be part of her SICA bill. And when I realized that she didn't come and that when I told her assistants, yeah, I'm the one that like I was Paris's, big sister and I'm afraid she's going to remember me badly. And they were like, oh, she would never think of you that way. It wasn't that. I'm never going to get to know. I'm never going to get to know if Paris Hilton remembers me. And that's the whole thing is that the drama of the survivor community is so bad is because the most famous princess on the planet has chosen to be our advocate, and she is not by her own people. We are still at her feet. We cannot find her. We cannot talk to her. I actually got in touch with Gloria Allred, one of the most famous power female attorneys on the planet. And I was like, I'm making a documentary about the troubled teen industry. I know that you were just in Teen Torture Inc. with some of the people that I'm working with. Can you help us further this cause because you're a part of it? Will you help us write a children's bill of rights? And Gloria Allred wrote back to me, I'm far too busy with my cases to do something like this, but you may wish to contact Paris Hilton. I didn't even write her back because it was just so funny. It's like, you can't go ask for help for something that's unbelievable by the most famous person on the planet. It doesn't work. So it's been the survivor community is sick because we all worship Paris Hilton, who's never coming to help us. And so what I've been trying to tell people is like, we don't need her. Let's do something on our own. And it's been controversial.
So Liam Scheff sadly passed away before his documentary was formally finished and released.
Yeah, so we don't even really know, like, he had told me that, like, he felt that, like, what had come out was doing such a good job that, like, he didn't feel like the need for it to be finalized, I guess. Or, like, but he had interviewed a lot of people. I interviewed 7 survivors, and 2 or 3 of them, I believe, had been interviewed by Liam specifically. And I actually didn't even really realize it until they had told me that they had realized their do not disclose or do not, discuss, like, contract with him had far expired. But yeah, I should tell the story about my friend. So Liam Scheff made this really great documentary. It's just clips about little parts of CEDU. About 7 years ago, or maybe even closer to 10, somebody that was at CEDU in like around 2000, he was taking a sociology class, and the class was about brainwashing, and the professor turned on a clip of Surviving CEDU, and I think it was the Raps episode. And my friend, I just made friends with, he ran out of the room and waited a little while and came back, and the entire class was still waiting there because they were all like, "So you went there, right?" And he was like, "Well, yeah." And so it's because this is, slowly coming out and we are the survivors of it, it's very hard for us to even look at this issue as it stands today to be a part of the solution. Like, for example, when I'm trying to talk, when I got onto Anne's podcast and I started talking to people about Landmark, I talked to my friends I talked to just my friend Rocky, who went to Academy at Ivy Ridge. She was, the only non-CEDU survivor to be interviewed so far. And I was like, I'm starting to look at Landmark and, all this stuff. And I'm like, have you looked into Landmark? And he's like, I can't. And I'm like, I get it. You can't look at the sun. You know what I mean? It's too painful for you guys to look at because it's too close to what you went through. And he's like, yeah. So a lot of times, all these documentaries are coming out. We haven't even watched them because it's too hard for us to watch. So what I'm trying to do is make it funny. I'm trying to make my interviews and conversations that I have with people that when the survivors watch it, they laugh their asses off at parts that I'm not even aware of, but that the public found it just profound. Do you know what I mean? Because they'll be very sarcastic about certain things because they've lived with this pain for so long. So when a survivor hears it, they laugh. But like other people, they're like, whoa, that was brilliant. And that's what I'm aiming for. I'm aiming for making something that survivors can laugh at, but the public, doesn't find it gross or distasteful that that's happening, but they just find what we did is brilliant. And so that's I'm going to make sure that that's the way it can be because I don't want to make the past mistakes of the other documentaries, but basically mine is a sequel to all of the ones that come before. Like I want to interview at least one person that has been in every single one of the documentaries about this subject before mine comes out.
So kind of like tying everything together, providing
Right, because
a through thread.
what I'm doing is like it would be tying the Synanon fix to the program. It's like what's in between the Synanon fix and the program. That's what I'm trying to make.
Well, we've kind of spent a lot of our 1 hour slot talking about the historical elements of the troubled teen industry and what ties all of these different areas together in terms of schools and people and CEOs and famous people. What caused your parents to place you in CEDU and how did you arrive there? Were you gooned, which is the expression that a lot of survivors use for Bill Lane's transport company basically kidnapping kids in the middle of
No, that didn't happen to me, and I'm very lucky for that. But they were like, "Oh, you're gonna take a tour of the school that you might go to. Let's go look at it." And so when I was on the tour, my dad drove away. So yeah, it's either usually that or
very,
the
very
lane.
Michael-esque. I remember his story being similar to that, and I also believe that Zach's story was very similar to that as well.
Zach Bonnie.
Yes,
Here's
Zach Bunny,
here's his
who
book.
wrote Dead, Insane,
Dead
or in
Insane or in
Jail,
Jail.
his
Where's his book?
memoirs on
Right here
CEDU.
somewhere. Oh, here's his book. There's Zach Bonnie's book. Yeah, his little brother from RMA is a big part of my team. He's the first, in my little clip for my Kickstarter that completely failed, but we'll probably launch it again maybe. But he's the first interview where he talks about going to SEUS, the School of Urban Wilderness Survival School. The way he talks about it is so funny. But yeah, a big reason, why he's on my team is because he's very smart about this stuff. But, when we met, he's like, my big brother from RMA was Zach Bonnie. He's like our author. I was like, oh, that's kind of great. And I've talked to Zach a couple of times. He's a sweetheart. He looks like Les Claypool. He's like, he's really, really sweet. But I do know, just based on talking to so many people from RMA, the experiences at RMA and CEDU were very different. It was, kids got beat at RMA. There was physical, there was physical abuse sometimes at RMA. Like it was, you would see staff throw kids across the room every once in a while. That was unheard of. That was unneeded, unnecessary, and it just didn't happen at our school. So it makes it so that we don't believe and I would only know that was true because my older brother got sent to RMA and he specifically told me that, yeah, when I was at RMA, a staff threw me across the room. So I know that there was physical violence at the other CEDU schools. It was I do know of one instance from an interview that a girl did get physically harmed at CEDU, but it was the only time I've ever heard of it. But I'm also not going to count something else that's very uncomfortable to talk about. But most of the time, it was not an abusive. Yeah.
Okay. So the troubled teen option for your family was obviously something that they were aware of if you and your older sibling both got sent to one of these programs.
Yeah, I was expelled out of eighth grade, and my dad went to like an educational consultant. I believe that I almost got sent to Tranquility Bay because I had my scuba diving license, and I remember packing up my scuba diving gear to go to a school. And then my dad did more research, and then he's like, "Oh, you don't need your scuba diving stuff. You're going to go to a different school." And from what I remember, it was that when my dad called Tranquility Bay to ask them about Kari has her Patty scuba diving license, does she need it for Tranquility Bay? Because they had no clue what that fucking was, he knew to not send me there. So he's like, okay, maybe I should look a little more into this, you know? And so I thanked my dad because if I had gone to Tranquility Bay, I might have been one of the many people that have a permanent white scar on their chin, because if you were in Tranquility Bay and you were bad, you were forced to lie on the floor on your face in a plank position for unknown amount of hours in the hot sun in the cement. So they have a permanent scar on their chin from that. So I didn't go through that, and I am thankful for that. But because our pain is inside, because we had to abuse ourselves in the name of self-help, that pain, because it's never understood, it's never recognized, is because that's why my friend Jackson at CEDU, he came up with the word CEDU-icide. Like CEDU-icide. Like, because because if you have an unrecognized pain and you live with it and nobody's ever understood it, that's what happens. We're never understood. It's, if you think about like rape victims, when they're not believed, that's very harmful for them. You know what I mean? It's the same thing. So most of us, I believe, if our parents just recognized this happened, we would be 100% mentally better. That's all we wanted. That's all we really want, is for people to be like, yeah, this happened. This was real. We're sorry that it happened. It's not their fault. They didn't know. They weren't the ones that did it. But the complete denial our parents are in that this is a real problem, this ever happened, that we're walking around the world like monsters because they turned us into monsters. You know what I mean? Like, it's not going to get better until people recognize that this is real. And that's what the program did for us. When the program came out, I saw somebody post that their psychiatrist, who they had not been in touch with for a long time, had called them for an emergency session because they sat them down and they're like, I just watched the program. Every word you had told me for the last 15 years before I stopped seeing you, I did not believe you. I never believed anything you said, but now I do. So that's the thing, like when I started, the first time that I was vlogging about, hi, I went to CEDU, I know that there's this documentary just came out called The Program. CEDU was totally different than the WASP schools. I already know about that, and I started just vlogging my live reaction to watching it so that I could explain how different it was, but also the same. Because, frankly, I have staff interviews. There were 2 staff interviews that I did on Zoom calls. The one was an hour, one was an hour and a half. And Randolph, he was like the vice principal kind of at CEDU. He's my boy. Like, he's the only adult that has apologized to me for what happened at CEDU, even though he worked directly under Bill Valentine. From everyone I've talked to, nobody can say that Randolph was ever mean or too harsh or, ever like did anything abusive. He, was a true flower child that, thought that he was, in this and he was in it for the right reasons. So I adore Randolph and I treasure him. And he does kind of have the mind of a survivor. He does have the tendencies that we have. But because he was an adult, choosing to go through these life experiences where the last one is just the worshiping of John Lennon's best song, the Imagine Prophet is just an homage to fucking John Lennon. Like, when I actually read through the script of the Imagine, it's so much more than I remembered. Like, we just worshipped John Lennon for an entire 24-hour period. But, it's, most people have forgotten about this stuff so much they don't even remember these things. Or like most people have run away from this subject their entire lives. So when they're like, putting it on TV, it's fucking so traumatizing. But when I talked to Randolph and I was like, I want to make a documentary about CEDU, and he's like, well, what's it about? I'm like, Randolph, it was a cult. Like, what do you think? And he was like, I was an adult. I was choosing to go through these experiences. So it worked for me. But I've realized that you guys were children. Of course you guys didn't like it. And he apologized. That's the only apology I've gotten. And I've gotten it from a couple of staff, especially the staff that gave me the box of documents from Mel Wasserman. They gave it to me because they wanted to help tell this story. They were like, we feel, they felt horrible at what happened to. Last October, like a little over a year ago, I was thrown into a mental institution for making this documentary. And they were pretty much told me that I was there for delusions of grandeur for making a documentary about a school that did not exist. So, I have a vested fucking interest in finishing this shit so that, like, to prove the people in my life that I am not crazy, So, but yeah, but Liam.
Strange though, do they think that you've just conspired with people like Zach Bonney, who's written a couple of memoirs about his experience in the same place?
Right. No, that's the whole thing is that like these people aren't reading these books. Like for example, like Maya's book. I'm sure you know about this book, Helping in a Cost by Maya. Like, when I started telling my dad, because my dad's a psychiatrist, he's a clinical social worker, and he invented a therapeutic process that teaches people not to be afraid of flying. He's a genius in his field. He's very, very smart. And when I was telling him about CEDU, he was like, well, I want a two-sided opinion. I want to, don't just feed me bullshit of the people that had a bad time. I want to hear both sides. And even in Maya's book, it says how the troubled teen industry cons parents and hurts kids. So my dad's never going to read this, because if he read that, that means that he's already been lied to and he's stupid. Do you know what I mean? So he would never read this. So the whole point of my documentary was to tell both sides, to talk to the people that maybe weren't as damaged and talk about their experience, and the people that were. So the idea was that the hardest interviews would be to get first would be staff. So that's what I did first. So when the program came out and I knew those people are monsters, I texted the people that I'd interviewed in my staff, the friends that I'm still, the staff that I still talk to. I said, if people come with pitchforks to your house with fucking torches, like they want to burn your house down, you can call me, because you are not a part of this problem. You are going to be a part of the solution. And so I don't want you to be afraid of talking to me. I don't want you to think that, I'm talking shit about you, saying that you are the same as the Litchfields that ran WASP. You guys were fucking different, and because you want to be a part of the solution, it makes you even more different. So it's a very complicated subject.
It sounds like it's got a lot of different layers. I mean, we haven't had much of a chance to speak about your personal
Yeah,
experiences.
I didn't. Yeah, and you sent me a lot of brilliant questions.
It's okay. I think what we can do is sort of wrap up the conversation today, talking about the logistics of the documentary and what we can expect and when, and then perhaps we can invite you back on once the documentary is aired to do a follow-up and a bit of kind of promotional stuff.
Oh, the documentary's probably, I can't imagine it's going to take less than a couple of years, so I'd like to come out again before.
Yeah, that sounds great.
Mostly what I would like to do is to go through some of the box that I have. And I would like to someday, talk about the actual profits with somebody, like it's new to them, so that it can be explained to, because a lot of what happens is the kids that didn't get to go through these experiences, as adults, they have a longing for that. They want to know what that was. And so I want to debunk a lot of the myths about it and kind of explain what happened so that it's more understood, but also so that the people that when they're in their nightmares, and that's when the only time they think about this stuff, when they see that it's been written down word for word, that their nightmares are written down word for word, it makes it so it doesn't have to be just remembered in their sleep anymore. It's the only time that I've gotten over what I've been through is reading the Prophet scripts, because this was all scripted. This was not ad-libbed. Like what the staff said to us, in the middle of the night at fucking high volume wall, like all these songs were playing, it was written down. This was a formula. And, even if you watch things like the Stanford Prison Experiment, where you see what happens when people are put in control positions and, there's power, it's the same thing. It's like the Lord of the Flies, the Stanford Prison Experiment, and like Synanon all happened in one place. And so these things are very hard to explain, and there's very, big and small differences when it gets to different facilities. For example, the first tool of the Truth Prophet is the truth shall set you free. At the Hyde School, which is like, I think the Hyde School is like a worse version of CEDU. It's like CEDU on the brown acid of the second night of Woodstock is how I describe it. So the Hyde School, they had the truth shall set you free, but first it will make you miserable. So like, we had something kind of positive. The truth shall set you free. But theirs is like, the truth shall set you free, but first it's going to make you miserable. Like they flipped everything and made it really dark. And like when I talked to Jordan about Spring Creek Lodge, like the tools that they had are what you fear, you create. Therefore, everything in your life that you're afraid of is your own fault. So the things that they would have to be using to get better were not helpful. They were just making it so that like you were only there because it's your fault and it wasn't good. Like one of the best tools that we had at CEDU was turn your fear into excitement. That was from the I Want to Live Prophet. I have lived my life by that. I'm afraid of spiders. Yet I kind of get off looking at fucking pictures of spiders because I get that excitement. So it's like, if you're afraid of something, it's so easy to turn that fear into an excitement. And I've lived off that. But that's not a very good thing for an 18-year-old girl to have, because I used to drive my car like 150 miles down the road, or like I've lived with no fear. And, that's not a healthy thing for people to have. The fear is there for a reason, so you don't, do stupid shit. But there was something about CEDU that if you graduated in, the late 80s, early 90s era, and you did the full program, it was like having the entire course of Scientology in your mind when you're like 17. It's like there are questions that I ask survivors of CEDU, like, how long does it take for you to make a stranger cry? And that is they laugh so hard because they're like, I can't believe you get that. I'm like, yeah. We were so used to picking apart people's insecurities that if we're in a room of strangers and somebody's pissing us off, we will say 2 words and they will go ballistic because we can look at people, know what they're insecure about, and call them out on it. A lot of us were sent away for violent reasons, and we've never had to be violent afterwards. But if we were, we black out. There's a common thing with CEDU people that, like, if we have to be violent afterwards, we don't remember what happened. We're like, we just know that we won. And I don't know what that is either. Like, we had some sort of mental training that is not normal. And when I realized that it was very different than what the other kids had, our school was the cultiest of all of the cult schools. Like, Tranquility Bay wasn't a cult. It was torture. It was just child abuse and torture. There wasn't an element of like thought reform or like, it was just torture. It was Guantanamo Bay for children. I would say that like, the Academy at Ivy Ridge and Spring Creek Lodge were culty, but, and they had culty elements because of the thought reform part of it. But there was no like, giving yourself up to something. There wasn't like, there wasn't like a worshiping of a higher being, and we did have that. It wasn't like we worshipped Mel Wasserman. It wasn't like he was our God, but like we were told that we were special and that we had a special knowledge that was going to make us better people, that was like we were more evolved. No one was ever going to understand us. Therefore, the friendships that you made at CEDU were going to be the best friendships you've ever had, and they're never going away. And that is true. The people that I loved at CEDU, the girl that I went to visit Paris Hilton with, when we went, her name was Jackie Mendel, we graduated together. She called me the other day and we talked for like over like 2 hours. And it was like no time had gone by, or like people will call me and they'll say, wow, I haven't talked, to anybody from CEDU from in 30 years, but like this is the first time I haven't had to censor what I'm saying to somebody. Like this is the first time that like I feel like I'm talking the same language to somebody. Like, and it's a hard thing for the other people in our lives because like, it's very common that other people in our lives are like, oh, you're going to get obsessed talking about CEDU again, or you're going to get, or, oh, I can't talk to you forever because somebody from CEDU just called, you're going to be you're going to be out for, 4 hours or whatever, and it's because, this has been on our mind for heavily for so long. It's never been recognized. And now this is the time that it's like, one of the survivors that found me, he's a brilliant musician. Like, have you heard of Nine Inch Nails or Marilyn Manson? That's Sesame Street to this guy. Like, it's the most brutal, hard, pain music that I've ever heard. And he went to Rocky Mountain Academy, and when he found me, it was because he was working at his job, and the program was water cooler talk in the lunchroom at his job. They're like, "Oh, have you seen the program? Do you know about these schools?" And this new friend that I have, he's just shaking his head, and being like, "I don't know what you're talking about. I don't know what you're talking about," because he hasn't thought about it in 30 something years. And so for these documentaries to come out, it's making people remember shit they weren't prepared to remember. And it's hard. So it's the reason, why I'm so public is to catch those people that are mad, and so that we can make something that changes people's mind, that includes all the past documentaries, doesn't make the mistakes of the past ones by having a handful of interviews and calling it a day, because it does not show the gambit of all the experiences. You have to have people that did have somewhat positive outcomes too, so that they can talk about it too, and you understand. It has to be a full documentary. A lot of people criticize the program because it was one-sided. It only showed the survivors making the documentary. It didn't kind of show what a good school is. You know what I mean? So that's the whole thing, is I'm trying to show everything. And because this is an unbelievable subject, and it's, involves cults and crazy shit, the only way that I feel like it's going to get made is being public about it. And it's making my director very, very mad.
So you've started tying the story together. You've got a team. You've done some interviews. You have an idea of the direction, a possible kind of 2-year window of when the documentary might be finished. What are some things that the survivor community can help you with? Like, before we finish up today, what are some calls to action that you might be asking for in your public space?
This is hard to say, right? The survivor community is disgusting. The people that have been in this community for a really long time have figured out ways to monetize this. So they are not helpful. There are basically organizations that I'm not going to name because I don't want you to get hated on, but there are people amongst us that basically, like, a survivor died a couple days ago, and I am pretty fucking sure that I'm waiting for this one organization to start getting her parents to be giving funds to this one organization amongst us.
Those kind of like other pockets of activism aside, I mean, you're working with the survivor community to make the documentary.
No, I'm not. I'm actually really not, because the survivor community is toxic as fuck. It's really disgusting. It's pretty much what you said. Like, the people are very attacking each other, and they feel like they're right because it's in the name of activism.
There's definitely a lot of infighting.
So yeah, so I'm just trying to do my own thing. I'm not involved in any organizations or anything. I'm not involved in like.
I think I'm kind of like not wording what I'm trying to say in the right way. So you're interviewing survivors for this documentary. I mean, kind of like not the survivor community as in one entity or one organization. I mean, kind of as a whole. Like on the Troubled Teen subreddit, there's a lot of people that are doing really good work. There's a lot of people involved in lawsuits and closing down schools on the legal side of things that are not involved in any of these organizations or charities or kind of NGOs or anything like that. If there were some, for example, like if Michael Balaban was listening, or if there were some survivors of CEDU or related programs, or even staff members listening, and they might be able to get involved and help in some way, what would there be anything you would like to say to those people?
Yes,
not
like
not the survivor community.
yeah.
And the
No,
infighting
like
and the difficult.
I'm out there. I'm findable. You can easily find me. I've had the same number my entire life. You know,
Me
uh,
too.
yeah, I've had this. I have an AOL email. You know what I mean? So my email is buntown at AOL.com. It's my last name, Town. Like this is gonna take a lot of information to solve this problem. Like I would like to talk to specifically people that went to Rudy Bent's sister schools. Rudy Bent's was a staff who left right when I got there. I was there for maybe 2 weeks with him, and he left, and I think he started Swift River Academy. He started a couple of schools. And I want to talk, I want to talk about the roots of the troubled teen industry, like the people that were there, like when it was just starting, and like I still haven't really talked to very many people from the Seed. I still haven't talked to very many people from like Straight Inc. or The Family. I haven't really talked to, but I have talked to a lot of people from Tranquility Bay, Academy at Ivy Ridge, Castle by the Sea, Cross Creek, Spring Creek Lodge, all the CEDU schools. I still would really like to talk to people from Hyde. I know that Hyde, because it is still active, that it is kind of the scariest one. Yeah, I would like to talk to as many people as I can, but especially I would like to talk to people working in this industry today. If you just left a job, or if you are working anywhere in this industry, I'm an adult. I'm not going to attack you or try to call you out for anything. This is a very tricky issue, and we cannot be children just assuming that everybody that like works at a facility for troubled teens does not mean that it's a culty troubled teen industry school. So because it's starting to come around that because the program's just still been sitting on Netflix for a year, that other people are waking up to this. Like the real world is like, oh shit, is this me? Is this my school? Wait a minute, it's not my school, but what can I do to help? And that's the best. Like, I can find survivors all over Facebook, but like, it's the people that might be afraid that I want to find. Like, I want to talk to, if you work at a school, or if you did work at a school, please talk to me, like tell me what you saw. It's not, that, you could totally be, confidential. I don't write shit down when I talk to people, because I don't want people to hear a pen scratch when, like them thinking that like I'm going to come back and use something against them because this stuff is so sensitive. So, I understand that, confidentiality is a really, really big thing. I am not going to get sued when this comes out. That's the whole goal. I don't want to get sued when this shit comes out. So I'm going to make sure that like everything is handled as well as it can be when it comes out. Like, I don't want anyone being like, I don't like the way I was seen. I don't like, what I said or whatever. I don't want any of that, but I also don't want people to feel left out. I want this documentary to be something that if you are aware that all these come out and you feel like you want to be seen, please contact me. Because one of the things that I really want to do is I want to have over 100 survivors in the same place and ask them yes or no questions. Like, were you only acting out because you were suffering an abuse at home? Are you autistic? Do you have ADHD? Are you bipolar? Did you witness homophobia? Did you witness transphobia? Did you witness, sexual assault? Did you experience sexual assault? There's all
You
these
should
different
send
levels.
out a survey. Send out a survey to the survivor community and ask them to write down the name of the program they were in and the answers to the
Right,
questions.
because
It'd be
it's
really interesting to
what's
see how it's
fascinating
taken.
though is that like the things that I didn't think other schools would have in common. Like I wrote, do you have a summit statement? Example, my summit statement was, I am courageous and responsible. And all these people from like Cross Creek were like, oh, I have a summit statement. And they told me what it was. And they're like, I didn't even remember that. You know what I mean? And we thought that these schools had nothing in common like that. So that there are things that are in common. And it's the weird shit that they made us say or do to each other, or like a lot. It's the character stretch is a very big thing in cults. That have you seen Midsummer?
Mm-hmm.
When she does the Mayfair dance and she does that whole thing and then they lift her up in the sky. That is the character stretch. That's essentially in all cult culture. They like there's some point where they give you a character that usually make the men dress up in drag, but they make you act out something so that, and then after you act out to a certain level, they raise you up to make you feel good. And it's like in all cults. It's like cult, it's like, it's just, I've found the character, like some version of the character stretch in everything. It's, yeah, but it was a big part of CEDU. Character stretch is also in like Freemason stuff. It's like a thing that they use, like a tactic to, it's almost like a leverage, you know, because they'll take pictures of you. So if you go against that cult, we got a picture of a man and dragon, we can use that against you.
Yeah, it's like collateral, isn't it? They're using it to as bribery material
Right,
almost.
right.
Yeah, something very, very common in many cults. You know, making people complicit in actual crimes like trafficking or theft or kidnapping or sexual abuse or criminal damage. You know, and Keith Raniere in Nexium was notorious for collecting collateral. So that was an actual physical version of him telling people to send him things that he could use as blackmailing material.
Right,
That
right.
extreme version is found in a lot of you know, less destructive cults that are still, you know, severe in nature, but perhaps not to that particular degree. And that's why he got a 120-year sentence, you know, unprecedented, not too many years ago. But buntown@aol.com. I'll put your email address in the episode description if you're comfortable with that.
Oh yeah, that's fine. Yeah.
If people also want to email me and ask to be put in touch with you, Kari, I can do that as well. I'm going to put a link to Liam Scheff's stuff into the episode description as well, which has some you know, great footage. It is difficult to watch, so it probably comes with a trigger warning for people.
Yeah,
But
because it shows like, you know, it shows the camp. He walks around the campus when it was still around when he was
yeah,
able to film that. We can't do that anymore, but he was able to get a lot of stuff that wasn't, you know, we wouldn't have been able to do now. And I felt the same that like when the program came out, a lot of the staff interviews, there's no way I would have been able to get those now. And so, yeah, but no, Liam,
yeah, I'm glad that I was able to word what I was trying to say before about your calls to action for survivors contacting you or staff members or former staff members contacting you to potentially become involved in your project. It just takes us to the end to just say thank
yes,
you.
yes.
Please
Thank
keep
you
us
so much for
posted.
having me on. I would love to come on again. And also, like, if you're an outsider and this interests you and you know something, or you live in a town where one of these schools are and you want to help, that's also very valuable because we can't be just a bunch of really damaged people trying to do this on our own. It takes people that are not crazy, that don't have damage, such as yourself, to help this issue be seen. You know what I mean? And that's why people like you are important, is that, you know, you're just trying to, you know, like make people aware of this problem. Broken people can't really do this very well. You know, because there is no therapy for what we went through. And it's all about, you know, we're making something to try to be believed, and it's not therapeutic. This is not fucking fun. This has
No.
not been like, you know, a healing journey whatsoever. I feel slightly better. I don't have complex post-traumatic stress disorder nightmares anymore. But even when I went to my friend Liz Ionelli's documentary premiere. Hers is called "The Kids Are Not All Right," and in the Q&A, she said, you know, she was talking about what she's like, just so you know, I don't feel better. She's like, I've worked on this documentary for like close to 9 years. I wrote a book, and today is not any better than 10 years ago. I still am hurt. It doesn't feel any better. And that was very fucking important for her to have told me because there's not going to be some cathartic, like, it's all over now after my documentary comes out. It's not going to feel like that. The struggle is still ongoing until this is over. And I don't think it's probably going to be over in my lifetime, but we can start the motion. But it has to be the survivors looking at the facilities today and pointing out abusive practices because we are the only ones who can really see it. So we have to be adult enough to actually look and ask the right questions and not attack the adults. This is not, you are in the wrong, you should be prosecuted. No, that does not solve any problem. That does not make it so that people want to come out and help. We are adults trying to figure out how to stop abusive culty practices on children in America today, and that's it. This is not about I'm not getting involved in lawsuits or lawyers, man. I'm just trying to fucking make a movie and like, call it a day. The subject is so complicated that like just getting, just me going to DC to be involved in the Paris Hilton nonsense is like cost me fucking almost 8 months, of my life because it's just been so crazy. But, so I'm
Yeah,
just
yeah,
sticking in my lane. I'm just trying to do this one thing. And it's, it's just like almost
yeah.
like,
I understand.
a
I
study
understand.
of what it is like of the adult survivors. Like we're all very alike in different ways based on our experiences.
Yeah, yeah. It's. I mean, I think a lot of survivors have different motives when speaking out and coming forward and sharing their experiences. I do also understand people that were physically harmed, sexually harmed, psychologically abused in these programs to ask for accountability. And I think that any human rights violations or crimes that were committed should be people should be held accountable. I'm not saying that that's what this project should do or that that's what you should be focusing on, but I think it goes back to what I mentioned earlier about how there's a whole puzzle and there's lots of different pieces that need to go in that puzzle to tell the whole story and to cure the entire environment. So one of those things is accountability. And one of those things is, making media that raises the educational understanding of everybody. People that went to CEDU, people that went to other TTI programs, parents that sent their kids there, educational consultants that referred children into the programs, judges that sent children to the programs, and people like me in England that had never heard of the troubled teen industry before I started doing this work. I think all of this stuff all comes together to create change. So
Right.
just because that's not what this project focuses on doesn't mean that that isn't something that other survivors might or
Oh
should
no.
be or
Like
could be
I have a
speaking for.
friend, like one of my friends, she's like we're talking to a lawyer about a class action lawsuit against the, CEDU for all the high school diplomas that we don't have. Like I'm in
Right.
contact with a lot of people who are working on other things. Yeah, I'm one person. So like I can't, like just with statute of limitations in all this different states that all these places are in. I'm friends with a boy, or I'm friends with a man. I'm friends with a trans man, and he is from the DC area. He got sent to a school in Utah. He's 22, and he still is in Utah because he can't make enough money to leave Utah. So essentially, he's been trafficked to Mormon land since he was a teenager, and he's still there right now. And it is a big part of my document is like helping people like that. Like he needs help, and I feel horrible all the time that he's been there since I met him a long time ago, and like there's people that need help as adults, and this is a huge issue. But all I can do is just try to make something that wakes people up to it, so that
Yeah.
they feel empowered to do more. Like
Absolutely. Yeah.
yeah,
And more eyes and ears on the subject might get the ball rolling on other projects and so on and so forth. And then before you know it, there's more momentum, there's more change, there's more support in place for people like your friend in Utah, and it kind of just snowballs. And that's what you hope for when you do. I said earlier it's a small drop in the ocean, but you throw enough pebbles in there, it's gonna make a big splash. So that's what we're hoping for. I'll put all this information in the episode description and wait for you to contact me about updates on the project and just to see how you're getting on, Kari. Thank you so
yes,
much
yes.
for
I
your
would love to
time
come on
today.
again really soon. So we didn't even touch any of the questions,
No,
which I was
we
pretty
didn't.
sure was
We
gonna
didn't.
happen.
That's
But
okay though. They're all here. In this document for another day. Maybe you can come back on in a few months' time and update us on where you are with the project. If there's anything particular the survivor community can help you with, and maybe talk a little bit about your personal experiences at CEDU. But thank you so much for your time today,
thank you
Kari. I
so
hope
much
you
for having
enjoy the
me.
rest
Thank
of
you
your
from across the
day.
pond.
Take care and stay safe over there.
I will. Thank you so much. It was so
Thank you.
nice. Thank you.
Bye.